It's 3 a.m. in New York, 10 in Kiev, and 4 on a Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Connyoung. This is ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Two weeks have passed since the tragic Sewol-ho ferry disaster put the entire nation in a state of shock, sorrow, and frustration. The number of confirmed dead has surpassed the 200 mark, but more than 90 people still remain unaccounted for. For a look at the latest developments on the search and rescue front and the ongoing investigation, our Kwon Soa joins us live from the news center. Now, Soa, compared to the last few days, the weather seems to have improved. Now, is it working in favor of the search and rescue efforts down at the accident site?
Well, yes and no, Connyoung. But before we look at the conditions in Jindo, let's take a look at the latest death toll. It currently stands at 210. 5 bodies were retrieved at around 3 a.m. this Wednesday on the left side of the 4th floor of the ship and in the lobby on the 5th floor. Although the weather conditions are favorable with clear skies, the tides are high and the currents fast. Although it's currently the time of the day when the sea should be calmer, divers are still encountering problems. Rescue crews will do what they can during this period to gain better access inside the ferry. They'll also get another chance at around 9 this evening.
Right, so let's hope that this crucial time window really brings us about results. Now, so can you give us more details on how the operations are unfolding today?
Yes, Connyoung, the Navy, Maritime Police, and civilian divers will continue with the search today, focusing on the 4th floor, where initially most of the missing were thought to be, but also on the 5th floor lobby, where many of the recently retrieved bodies were located. The commander of the recovery operation thinks the bodies found in the lobby were of students who had been on the 4th floor.
As the water started coming in, the students probably instinctively rushed to the upper floor.
The students most likely tried to make their way up the stairs to the 5th floor to get onto the deck of the ship, but unfortunately they were not able to get out. Now, meanwhile, a diving bell, which would allow divers to stay underwater for longer periods of time, could not be deployed earlier in the day due to the rough water conditions, but another try will be made this afternoon.
All right, so now on to the investigations. What about the criminal negligence charges being brought against several people associated with the accident? What's the latest there?
Well, Connyoung, the special investigation team is speeding up its probes, especially regarding the practical owner of the ferry, Yu Byung-on. One of 7 key figures linked to Yu, the CEO of the cosmetics company Da Panda, named Song Guk-bin, was questioned at the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office this morning on suspicion of corruption. Now, as for the Yu family, prosecutors are looking into first summoning the members currently in the country, which includes Yu's children. Meanwhile, the latest investigation reveals that the Sewol-ho ferry had been put on sale a month before the accident. It was being sold for an amount that would have resulted in financial losses of roughly $5.8 million. Investigators are trying to figure out why.
Well, it definitely looks like the investigation will be a prolonged one. Now, so what about the students that survived and were hospitalized after the accident? Now, they were allowed to go home today. How are they doing?
Yes, out of the 88 patients from the Sewol-ho ferry accident that were hospitalized at Korea University Ansan Hospital, 74 were Danwon High School students, and 70 of them were discharged this Wednesday after lunchtime. Doctors said in a briefing earlier that their conditions had improved considerably.
It's been determined that most of the students don't have any symptoms that could trigger dangerous after effects in the near future.
Many had shown signs of post-traumatic stress following the accident. The president of the hospital said the students should not be exposed to any news on the Sewol-ho ferry or anything else that might remind them of that tragic day. Now, on the request of the students, they went to the group memorial altar in Ansan to say their goodbyes to their fellow classmates and teachers who did not survive. Now that's all I have for now, but I'll be back with more updates in a further newscast.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Connyoung. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
A day after North Korea fired off 50 heavy artillery shells just north of its maritime border with South Korea, the United States spoke out, calling on Pyongyang to stop its string of provocations. The next one could come in the form of a nuclear test, and some experts say that even though a fourth nuclear test is highly likely, it is not imminent. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The press secretary of the Pentagon, John Kirby, called on North Korea on Tuesday to stop its provocations that are stirring up tensions on the Korean peninsula. Kirby's comments came in response to North Korea's live fire drill near the de facto maritime border with South Korea in the West Sea on Tuesday, during which 50 heavy artillery shells were fired. It was the latest in a string of provocative acts from north of the border. The larger question, though, is what's next? The speculation is that the North will conduct a fourth nuclear test in the near future, but determining when is another story. Despite thorough analysis of several commercial satellite images, Joel Witt, a senior fellow with the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University, said it's hard to predict. While Witt said that there are currently no signs that a test is imminent, he added that North Korea is almost certain to carry out a nuclear test at some point. While we wait, the North Korean regime continues to talk up its nuclear program. The regime on Tuesday condemned U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Northeast Asia and said it will strengthen its nuclear deterrent. The North's National Defense Commission said it has the capacity to carry out something bigger than a boost-efficient nuclear weapon test or a new intercontinental ballistic missile launch, and that the regime would not dismantle the program under any circumstances. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, a North Korea expert in China has also put forth his forecast on Pyongyang's fourth nuclear test. Yang Shi-wei, a research fellow from the China Institute of International Studies, says North Korea will conduct a fourth nuclear test sooner or later. He says resuming the stalled six-party talks on Pyongyang's denuclearization and giving aid to the country is the only way to prevent North Korea from following through on its threat. The Beijing-based expert also adds that he expects North Korea to conduct even more nuclear tests in the future, as the regime has no intention of giving up its nuclear program. South Korea's defense ministry has said North Korea is prepping for a fourth test, but it's still not clear if Pyongyang is just faking the build-up to one. Meanwhile, plans to establish a memorial paying tribute to the victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement are reaching an advanced stage in Washington. An official speaking on behalf of a group of Korean American societies in the U.S. says preparations began 2 years ago and funds have been raised to buy the rock that will be used for the statue. They add that the monument could be set up as early as next month. And when the statue is established, surviving comfort women, officials from the Korean Council for Women drafted for military sexual slavery, and Korean citizens living in that district are expected to commemorate the establishment. The first memorial statue in the U.S. was established in New Jersey back in 2010. Meanwhile, Korea's ancient mountain fortress, Namsan Fortress, is likely to be added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in June. The Cultural Heritage Administration says UNESCO's advisory panel, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, recently evaluated the historic mountain wall and recommended it be given World Heritage status. Now, with that recommendation, Namsan Fortress is almost certain to be added to the UNESCO list at the 38th meeting of the World Heritage Committee in Doha, Qatar in mid-June. The strategic defense fortress is more than 1,000 years old and is located southeast of Seoul. The Heritage Administration says the fortress was recommended for its historical representation of military architecture and city planning in ancient Asia. And now shifting our focus to the economy, Korea's industrial output rebounded in March on the back of strong exports of automobiles and computer chips. Well, concerns do linger, however, on the impact that the sunken ferry disaster might have on the economy in the coming months. ARIRANG's Hwang Ji-hye explains.
Korea's industrial output last month dismissed worries that the nation's economy might not be recovering as many had hoped. Statistics Korea said Wednesday that the nation's industrial output rose 0.9% in March from the previous month, following 2 straight months of decline. The agency attributed the gain in industrial output, which includes production in the mining, manufacturing, and gas industries, to strong exports of automobiles and semiconductors. It added that most sectors, including retail, sales, and facilities investment, performed better than the previous month. The Bank of Korea data also showed that business sentiment among Korean manufacturers is on a moderate pace of recovery. The index, which gauges the assessment from manufacturers on current business conditions, came in at 82 this month, up from 81 in March. Although a reading below 100 still means that pessimists outnumber optimists, the reading for April marked the 3rd straight month of strengthening business confidence. While concerns remain over whether the improvement will continue in the coming months with the sunken Sewol-ho ferry disaster hurting consumer sentiment, Nomura Securities believes the disaster will have a limited impact on the economy. The Japanese financial group kept its growth forecast for Asia's 4th largest economy for this year unchanged at 4%. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
The nation's construction industry may be on track to recovery. Well, first quarter figures show an improvement in the sector, but analysts say there's still a ways to go before a normalization. The Korea Financial Telecommunications and Clearings Institute say the average operating profit rate of the nation's top 10 construction companies in the January to March period was 3.8%, up from the 4th quarter of last year. Well, industry insiders attribute the rise to a jump in apartment contracts and favorable production cost rates in the foreign markets. However, the unstable housing market in the country and intense competition to win overseas contracts still act as factors keeping the sector from entering into a full recovery. The government is putting its foot down over massive debt and excessive benefits at public organizations. New reform measures order wide-scale changes with specific goals that must be reached, and if they aren't, the CEOs of the organizations could find themselves out of a job. Song Ji-sun has more.
Public organizations in Korea have long been criticized for their ballooning debts and excessive employee benefits, and the government is determined to end such practices. They finalized a plan to sell off their non-core assets, slash exorbitant benefits, and streamline the overall business structure. As the first step to overhaul nearly 300 public institutions, the finance ministry has ordered them to reduce their debt by some $50 billion over the coming years. Their goal is to lower the combined debt level of these organizations to 187% by 2017, down 34 percentage points from 2012. The government will conduct an interim evaluation of their debt reduction efforts in the second half of this year. If the organization's progress is deemed unsatisfactory, their CEOs could be replaced and the salaries of their employees frozen. Welfare benefits for employees could also be axed. Welfare spending at the institutions will be slashed by an average of $700 per person a year, down a quarter from last year. The measures are part of a 3-year economic innovation plan announced by President Park Geun-hye in February to normalize the public sector. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Unionized workers at the Korean unit of Citibank are in talks to stage a walkout in protest of the bank's plans to shut nearly a third of its local branches as a restructuring and cost-cutting measure. Over 3,000 Citibank workers will hold a vote on whether to strike later on this Wednesday. And if they do agree, workers will initially go on a partial strike, but then they'll switch to a full strike if the bank refuses to enter talks. Well, Citibank Korea announced last week that it would shut more than 50 branches by the end of this year. And if this strike does go ahead, it will be the first in the local banking sector since workers at Standard Chartered Bank walked out in 2011. The world's two leading smartphone makers are reaching the end of another court battle. Samsung Electronics and Apple made their closing arguments to a jury in California Tuesday in a patent infringement case with billions of dollars at stake. Our Kim Ji-yeon tells us how it unfolded.
Apple Incorporated and Samsung Electronics have made their final arguments at a $2 billion trial over patent infringement in the U.S. state of California. The two sides were each given 2 hours to make their final cases on Tuesday. Apple's lawyer Harold McElhenney told the jury that Samsung had become the world's leading seller of smartphones by willfully and intentionally copying the iPhone maker's features. Samsung's lawyer Bill Price said that Samsung's success was based on providing the best hardware for Android, and that the features under fire were already developed and included in Google's independently developed platform. Price said Apple wasn't even using 3 of the 5 patents it raised in the complaint. He said Samsung could not copy something from the iPhone if it wasn't featured in the iPhone at the time. Apple claims some Samsung devices, including the Galaxy S3, infringed on 5 of its patents, including on features like the slide to unlock function and automatic spell corrects. Samsung filed a counterclaim that some of the Apple's devices, including the iPhone 5, infringed upon 2 of its patents concerning Apple's video chatting service called FaceTime and the way in which Apple's devices retrieve and organize digital images. Apple is asking for nearly $2.2 billion in damages from Samsung, who in turn has asked for more than $6.2 million from Apple. Samsung was ordered to pay damages of $929 million to Apple in their first trial over dueling claims of patent infringement. Both companies appealed, and the decision has since moved up to a higher court. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Now, the Korean won touched a 6-year high against the U.S. dollar Tuesday as Asia's 4th largest economy reported a strong export performance in March. Let's find out how high it got and whether there could be an intervention by the government or even the central bank. We're joined live in the studio by our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Byung-ju. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
Now, so yesterday it was the Korean won ended at a near 5 years and 8 months closing high,
right.
And today we're seeing that the won has best month since September.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a relative sense, how high is this valuation really?
The views are divided at this point. If we compare, if we take a look into about, for instance, for the past 5 years trend, which we should have a picture here on the screen in a few seconds. Overall, we are talking about 15% appreciation of Korea's won from its peak or bottom. I should call it actually on the left side hand, it is a bottom because there was the lower valuation, and it has been climbing up. Now I'm saying this in reverse to what you're looking at the screen here, but just keep in mind we're talking about depreciated value on the left side, and then appreciation as you move toward the right-hand side. So that's a 15% change. Some people say it's not that big, especially for bigger exporting companies here in Korea, but definitely SMEs that are reliant upon exports, that is considerable change. And if we just consider the past year change, overall of past month change, take a look at it right there on the screen once again. And we are talking about 4% appreciation during the past month. So that's considerable rise. Today, the valuation stands at 1,033.2, which is a little change from yesterday. The figure which you're looking at right at this point, it's like 0.28%. So what you're looking at on the right-hand side of the screen is almost close to what we had at the closing of the market, which was less than about an hour ago.
Right.
With this current level of won valuation, we are almost back to the pre-2008 financial crisis, global financial crisis level. So that's where we stand.
Right. So all in all, on a monthly standard, during April, the won rose 3%, so
Right.
that's pretty significant.
Right.
Now, usually we see the won appreciate when foreign investors buy or stock up on Korean shares,
Right.
and that wasn't the case yesterday.
Right. Yesterday and the day before, what has been happening is foreigners were continuously selling Korean stocks. And as you mentioned, when foreigners sell their stocks, usually we should expect depreciation of won, but that's not what we were seeing the past 2 days. Today, foreigners were continuing to sell their stocks once again, driving KOSPI down to 1961. This time we had a moderate depreciation of the won, which I just mentioned. So today what we saw was a little bit normal, but for the past few days it was rather abnormal. Keeping in mind that actually foreigners buying of Korean stocks has been one of the key, most strongest factors behind the movement of won's valuation. So people are saying, what's happening? One of the answer is with the long weekend coming, exporting industries, exporting businesses here in Korea may be trading their dollars ahead of time, selling their dollars here. So that's what seems to be happening for the past few days. And also abroad, what's happening is in the United States, we have Federal Open Market Committee meeting coming up, and we are not expecting any reason for dollar to get stronger here. So that's another factor that stands or that is placed on the table here.
Right, because at this point, the U.S. Feds are expected to take further steps toward ending its bond buying program.
Right.
So that is what we're expecting, as well as the investors.
Right.
Now, let's talk about current account surplus for March. Now, we posted a $7.4 billion current account surplus. Again, in a relative sense, how big is this?
Actually, as a March figure, like we compare each month every year, and as March figure, it was the largest March figure ever for current account surplus. But in a longer term trend, let's bring up some the bar graph that we have prepared. Okay, so longer term trend, it's like highest in 6 months since with the October figure being the recent peak here. But still, same story remains here. We are seeing Korea's foreign reserve size continuing to go up, continuing to increase, and that is a significant factor behind Korea's continuing appreciation of our currency.
Right. Now, so how do we expect the won to stabilize? Which institute could, for instance, if it is required, could even intervene to stabilize the won?
Very important questions, two questions. Where we can see the valuation stabilize, there's a big debate out there. About 2 weeks ago, IMF at that time said Korea's won is still deflated, and there is a further appreciation needed by about 8%. Yeah, undervalued. And IMF was unusually saying Korean won still needs 8% appreciation. Now we've seen about like 4% so far, which means about 5-6% more to go, according to IMF. And I hope this number will not trigger speculation in the currency market here. The thing is, that's the one view for further appreciation to go. But other views, especially Korea's economic research institutes that are run by Chaebol, which are heavily dependent upon exports, they're all arguing this is overvaluation and we need to go back to the level of about 1,100 per dollar. So the view is severely divided at this point. But going back to the second part of your question, then should we expect intervention from the authorities here? We're not sure about that. But with the IMF statement being outstanding, saying that it's overvaluation that Korea needs to deal with, I think intervention would be quite difficult ahead. But market participants seem to be expecting a little bit more of that coming, and I think that expectation might have been reflected in today's depreciation, which was just a little bit.
Just a tad bit there.
Right.
And of course, the market will be closed tomorrow for a public holiday, Labor Day here in Korea. And then reopen on Friday just for a short while, just a day. And then next week, the first 2 days we have off. So we won't see much activity there in the Korean market in the next few days.
Right, so we can talk about this once again, perhaps sometime next week if possible.
Definitely. All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And that's all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching. Do join me again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.